At just 12 years old, Johnny Gosch vanished without a trace. One more day in the small town of Des Moines, Iowa, and the next, his family's world changed forever. It was a sunny Tuesday in September 1982 when Johnny left home early to deliver newspapers, just like he did every day. But that morning, he never came back. What began as a worrying absence soon turned into a mystery that would tear a family apart and leave an indelible mark on the community. No one saw anything suspicious, no one heard a scream or any sign of a struggle. Johnny simply vanished. The police launched a frantic search. Streets, parks, basements, and every possible corner were checked. However, there were no clear clues or reliable witnesses. The case of the missing 12-year-old boy began to turn into a story that no one could explain. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The anguish of his parents, John and Noreen Gosch, grew with every hour that passed without news. In a world without cell phones or security cameras like we have today, the shadow of uncertainty stretched on endlessly. Meanwhile, in the dark web of the case, disturbing theories began to emerge. Had he been kidnapped by a stranger? Or was it someone close to the family? The police explored every possibility, but nothing fit. Noreen's silence was deafening. But what truly shocked everyone came years later. 15 years later, in 1997, news shook the nation. Johnny Gosch had returned, but not as everyone remembered him. No one expected the missing boy to come back as an even deeper mystery. The story of Johnny's return was full of shadows and contradictions. The man who appeared didn't seem to be the same as the boy who had disappeared on that fateful September day. His story, fragmented and confusing, left everyone with more questions than answers. The details Johnny shared with his family and the authorities were scarce and bewildering. He spoke of lost years, of people who had kept him captive, of a hidden life no one could imagine. However, the evidence to confirm his identity was scarce, and his behavior was unsettling. Doubts about his true identity and the circumstances of his return soon began to raise even darker questions. Was he really Johnny Gosch? Had he been the victim of a prolonged kidnapping, or was there something more complex behind all of this? What seemed like a ray of hope turned into a new nightmare. Just months after his return, Johnny disappeared again. This time, without leaving any trace or explanation. It was as if time had stopped at that stolen childhood, and the eternal disappearance was a curse that haunted it. This second disappearance added an almost unbearable layer of mystery to the case. The authorities were faced with a puzzle that defied logic and understanding. The family, once again, was trapped in a labyrinth of anguish and hopelessness. The impact on the community and public opinion was enormous. This case of disappearance, return, and new disappearance sparked debates about child safety, police effectiveness, and the dark secrets that can hide in everyday life. But the case of Johnny Gosch is much more than just a simple kidnapping story. It is a story that reveals the cracks in a system incapable of protecting the most vulnerable, a mirror of human fragility and of the resilience of those who refuse to give in to uncertainty. Over these decades, stories, hypotheses, and theories have been woven together in an attempt to make sense of the incomprehensible. From possible human trafficking networks to more sinister implications, the case has maintained its aura of unresolved mystery. The Gosch family, especially Noreen, the mother, became a tireless symbol of struggle. Her search was not just for a son, but for the truth. The fight of a mother who never stopped believing that Johnny was alive, even if no one else could prove it. Through letters, interviews, and testimonies, Johnny Gosch's story was pieced together like a fragmented puzzle. Each piece, a revelation or a disappointment, until forming a disturbing picture that still today invites reflection. This story of disappearance and return brings universal questions to the table. What happens to those who disappear? How do their families cope with the emptiness? And, above all, what secrets can a disappearance hide when it repeats like a dark echo through time? Meanwhile, the city of Des Moines never forgot that day in September 1982. In its streets, the echo of Johnny's disappearance still resonates, a constant reminder of how fragile safety and hope can be. But what really happened to Johnny during those 15 years? Where was he, and why did he return only to disappear again? These questions remain unanswered, fueling theories and stories that try to fill the void with explanations often more unsettling than the mystery itself. The case also exposed the slowness and mistakes in the initial investigation. Police protocol, limited resources, and the lack of technology at the time left a gap in information that could have been crucial. It's a case that has served as both an example and a warning for systems dealing with the search and care of missing persons. The evolution of technology, social awareness, and international cooperation have changed a lot since then, but the memory of Johnny still lives on as an unresolved shadow. Ultimately, the story of Johnny Gosch is not just a disappearance case. It's a window into our deepest fears and the power of hope in the face of the inexplicable. A case that, though shrouded in mystery, remains a call to not forget, to keep searching, to never give up. Johnny's unexpected return in 1997 shook his family and the entire community. After 15 years of uncertainty, the news seemed like a miracle, a renewed hope. But the reality was much more complex and darker than anyone could have imagined. The man who appeared did not introduce himself as Johnny Gosch, nor did he have clear memories of his childhood. Instead, he showed signs of confusion, fear, and deep trauma. There was something broken in him, as if his story had been shattered by years of invisible suffering. Johnny's parents, especially his mother, initially had doubts, fearing that perhaps he was an imposter. However, some details the woman remembered from her son's childhood made them believe that he could really be their son. But the connection was tense, marked by a heavy silence, an emotional distance that seemed impossible to overcome. Meanwhile, the authorities faced an unprecedented challenge. They tried to verify his identity through fingerprints, photographs, and medical tests, but the evidence was inconclusive. The lack of complete records and the widespread distrust only fueled the uncertainty further. The statements Johnny gave about his captivity were fragmented and sometimes contradictory. He spoke of a man who had held him for years, of dark places and constant travel, but without clear details that would allow them to locate him or unravel the network behind his abduction. This forced silence and the gaps in his story made many experts in disappearances doubtful. Some believed he might be suffering from trauma so deep that it distorted his memories, while others feared he could be under some form of psychological control or manipulation. In any case, Johnny's return did not bring the expected closure, but rather the beginning of a new chapter full of doubts and new investigations. The authorities reopened the case, but the years and the lack of clues remained an almost insurmountable barrier. But perhaps the most unsettling part was that, just a few months after his return, Johnny disappeared again. This second disappearance had no explanation at all, leaving an even more distressing void for those who had seen him again with hope. No one knew how, when, or where this new disappearance happened. There were no notes, messages, or signs. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, erasing any trace of his presence. This time, the police found few clues. The case, already complicated, became practically impossible to solve. The family, broken once again, was trapped in endless anguish, with no answers or comfort. The emotional impact on the parents was devastating. Their tireless struggle to get their son back turned into an ordeal that seemed to have no end. Each day that passed without news was an open wound, a brutal test of endurance in the face of the impossible. This mystery also shook public opinion and the press, who closely followed the events, generating growing interest around a case that had become a symbol of unresolved child disappearances. Moreover, Johnny's story sparked a debate about police protocols, the technological limitations of the time, and the urgent need to improve systems for searching for and protecting minors. His case served as a wake-up call that drove significant changes in the way these tragedies are addressed. Despite everything, the Gosch family never gave up hope. John Gosch, in particular, dedicated his life to fighting for justice and keeping his son's memory alive. His tireless search inspired many and helped bring attention to a problem that affects thousands of families around the world. Meanwhile, the shadow of Johnny's disappearance stretched far beyond Iowa. His story became a universal symbol of the fight against child abduction and the lack of answers in these cases. Over the years, numerous theories have been woven around the case. From human trafficking networks to involvement in cults or even darker conspiracies, each hypothesis has added another layer of mystery to an already enigmatic story. Some independent investigators and journalists began to follow leads that the police had dismissed or were unable to pursue. These alternative investigations shed light on unknown aspects and proposed new avenues to solve the case. But the truth continues to elude us. As the years have gone by, Johnny's memory as a missing child has gradually turned into a disturbing legend, an enigma that defies logic and moves anyone who hears his story. Johnny's return and his subsequent second disappearance seem to point to something deeper, a plot that goes beyond a simple kidnapping. What invisible forces could have manipulated his life? What secrets are hidden behind the silences and the absences? This case invites us to reflect on the lasting impact that a disappearance can have, not only on the immediate family, but on an entire community and, ultimately, on society as a whole. It also raises questions about the fragility of childhood, vulnerability in the face of violence, and the importance of not forgetting those who disappear without explanation. Ultimately, the story of Johnny Gosch is not just a police mystery, but a profound human tale, full of emotions, hopes, and despair. Despite the years and the shadows that have darkened the path, the search for the truth continues. And even though the end of this story has not been written, Johnny's legacy lives on, reminding us of the need to protect the most vulnerable and to keep the flame of hope burning, even in the darkest of times. Noreen's second disappearance left a void that could never be filled. With each day that passed without news, the anguish and pain became a silent echo that resonated in every corner of the Gosch family and among those who followed the story. John Gosch, her father, became an emblematic figure in the fight against child disappearances. Without rest, he dedicated years to searching for answers, traveling down paths that the official authorities had not explored or did not want to face. His efforts were not only focused on finding Johnny, but also on preventing other children from suffering the same fate. He founded organizations, spoke publicly, and worked to improve search and prevention protocols. But even with all his tenacity, the mystery remained unsolved. The silences surrounding the case grew heavier, and with them, the unanswered questions. Who was behind the kidnapping? Where was Johnny? Why did he come back only to disappear again? Over the years, several witnesses and supposed leads emerged, but none led to a clear resolution. Some reports spoke of remote places, of people with suspicious behavior, and even of possible international criminal networks. But the lack of solid evidence caused those paths to close one after another. This unsolved mystery became a reflection of the fragility and vulnerability experienced by thousands of families when a loved one goes missing. A cruel reminder of how unpredictable fate can be, and how little can sometimes be done in the face of it. Johnny's case also sparked an important debate about the role of the police, the media, and society. Was enough done to find him? Were there mistakes, negligence, or even complicity? These questions have lingered in the air without a definitive answer. But beyond the investigation and the theories, what remains unchanged is the face of a boy who disappeared one day and returned only to vanish again into the shadows. That image has been etched into the collective memory as a symbol of the endless fight against injustice and oblivion. The story of Johnny Gosch invites us not to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, to keep the flame of hope alive, even when it seems fragile or faint. Because behind every disappearance, there is a family waiting, a heart that keeps beating in search of answers. In the end, this case is not just about a kidnapping, but about human resilience, unbreakable love, and the need for justice. It reminds us that every missing person is a story that cannot go untold, a cry that must be heard. Even if we don't know the whole truth about Johnny, or the final fate that life had in store for him. But his story will continue to be a beacon in the darkness for those who fight against disappearance and oblivion. Thus, in the memory of Johnny Gosch lies the voice of all the missing, a call to action and compassion that must never be ignored.